Before the tide returns, the ocean reveals what it has tried to hide for centuries. Forgotten cities, coral worlds, lives shaped by wind and water. This is the Swahili coast, and this is where our journey begins. The fifth day of the trip. Funzi Island, at 4 degrees south latitude, the early morning hours mark the time of low tide. The Indian Ocean recedes, revealing more and more stretches of the shoreline. Mohammed is a master of preparing octopus the Swahili way. A vigorous striking of the octopus against the ground replaces the use of a meat tenderizer, and the flesh should become soft and tender. After rinsing it in salt water, it is ready to be grilled. Noon. The sun is already at its zenith, and several hours have passed since breakfast. It's high time for a snack. Juma gets the fire going, while Mohammed readies the sticks for the spit. The meat is prepared and grilled in just a matter of minutes. The southern tip of Funzi Island lies just 1 kilometer from the mainland. At low tide, the channel separating the two stretches of land is no more than a meter deep. Although Funzi lies close to the Kenya-Tanzania border, it is seldom visited by outsiders. Its inhabitants are peaceful farmers of Swahili heritage. Funzi was never a major trading hub like Mombasa or Lamu, but rather a quiet, peripheral settlement set apart from the main routes. Even so, its inhabitants kept in touch with traders moving along the coast, and traditional dhow boats served as their main means of transport. During the colonial period, first under the Sultanate of Zanzibar and later under British rule, the island remained of little economic importance. As a result, it escaped heavy urban development and has retained its traditional rural character, remaining one of the more authentic remnants of the old Swahili world. We arrived on Funzi straight from Nairobi. A bamboo hut with a mosquito net became our home for a few days. The first to befriend us was a local dog. Like many village mongrels, our new four-legged companion always seemed hungry. In the privacy of their home courtyards, some women engaged in handicrafts. Weaving mats and selling them at the market provided additional income and helped support the household budget. The central place in the village was the area around the water pump. As across much of sub-Saharan Africa, it was the responsibility of Swahili women to supply the household with water. The space by the pump was an ideal spot to chat with neighbors or do a bit of trading. Our friend Joanna quickly became the center of attention, quite unintentionally. The local women set aside their chores, paused their conversations, and turned their focus to trading. Each eagerly tried to show off her brightly colored scarf or shawl. Soon several scarves had changed hands, and we left the market by the pump. Unlike other Swahili islands, there were no ruins of old settlements here. The village was surrounded by a network of caves and pits. Ali explained to us that during high tide, many of these natural hollows fill with salt water. Ali suspected the existence of an underground system of coral tunnels beneath the island. Funzi was of coral origin, and as recently as a few centuries ago, much of it lay underwater. After the scorching days came refreshing evenings. One of the greatest pleasures was swimming in the Indian Ocean. It wasn't easy to cross the shallow shoreline, strewn with rotting seaweed and treacherous mangrove roots. We relied on an inflatable raft. Each day we were struck by how quickly the sun sank at the equator and how suddenly darkness followed. We planned a boat trip to the mouth of the Reef River. The Reef River flows along Kenya's southern coast, emptying into the Indian Ocean amid vast mangrove forests. Along the way, we passed sandbanks that emerged from the ocean during low tide. The empty beaches tempted the few Europeans who ventured here. We too moored at the shore, drawn by the allure of a deserted beach. Ali enjoyed a refreshing swim while we dipped into our supply of cold drinks. At the river's mouth, sandbanks formed in the shallows. Our Swahili friends cut the engine and carefully guided the boat, probing the treacherous riverbed with their feet. With each bend, the river deepened to a darker shade of green as we pushed further inland. The banks became more remote, and the first inhabitants of the Reef began to emerge. After 3 kilometers, we came to an abrupt halt. The cause was a cracked propeller. Fortunately, Ali had spare parts, and our stop on the muddy bank lasted only a few minutes. A crocodile appears, though it's hard to gauge its size before it slips beneath the surface. On the bank, a 2-meter monitor lizard prowls. Soon, however, all the reptiles vanish. The sound of the motorboat sends them fleeing. They likely carry uneasy memories of encounters with humans. After our river excursion, we're famished. Luckily, Ali's sisters are already at work in the kitchen. We eat 3 meals a day, with fish and vegetables forming the staple of our diet. Juma takes his responsibility for the guests seriously, often checking in on the kitchen and occasionally lending a hand with the cooking. Our lunch arrives in no time. Alongside the chicken, we're served boiled bananas with potatoes, followed by papaya for dessert. Our 4 days on Funzi Island pass quickly, and we begin preparing for the next stages of our journey. Dominic has a rather unconventional way of cleaning his shoes. We still have hundreds of kilometers ahead of us. Different geographic and climatic zones await: green savannas, snow-capped mountains, and yellow-brown deserts. Shoes drying in the sun are among the most essential elements of our gear. In our bags, we carry reliable ointments and coils against insects, water disinfectants, and other essentials that make life easier off the beaten track in Africa. Our final evening on the island arrives, and we spend it by the water, surrounded by a group of children. At this hour, the residents of Funzi are finishing their day's work, and many drift toward the shore, treating the beach as their evening promenade. The next morning, we meet on the beach. The ocean recedes, leaving behind damp sand and boats resting on the exposed seabed. We board Juma's boat. Our Swahili friends accompany us on the crossing to the mainland. Only Ali stays behind on the island. We promise to write him a few words in a letter from Europe. We bid farewell to the people of Funzi Island, yet stay by the Indian Ocean. Our next destination is the old stone towns of Swahili culture scattered along Kenya's coast. Near the border with Tanzania lies the old port town of Shimoni. Several traditional dhow boats are moored close to the pier. Equipped with sails known as furani, they ply the waters between the Kenyan coast and Zanzibar. Like many Swahili ports, Shimoni's days of glory are long behind it. The arrival of the British in the early 20th century, along with the expansion of the port in Mombasa, weakened trade between Swahili towns along the East African coast. In Shimoni, we come across the ruined houses of Arab traders, worn down by time, little remains of the wealth once amassed by 19th century slave merchants. The old houses and coral caves in Shimoni are the last remnants of a world that disappeared more than 100 years ago.
Slaves were kept in the cave, from which Arabs drove them to the ocean through a 7-kilometer tunnel. The slaves were loaded onto boats and sent to Zanzibar, where they were sold at the market. Shimo means cave. Shimoni means in the cave.
Together with Zaharani and his friend, we make our way into the cave that gave the port town its name. In one of the smaller chambers, Dominic and Joanna scanned the darkness for bats.
There was once a well here, and the slaves held in the cave were desperately thirsty. The well was once very deep, but over time it gradually filled in.
In the large hall, it is clearly visible that the caves are of coral origin. The underground tunnel system stretches for 20 kilometers. One of the passages leads directly to the shore.
This is how the slaves left the cave, squeezing through the narrow opening before being loaded onto boats bound for Zanzibar.
Przeciskali się przez otwór i byli ładowani na statki na Zanzibar.
We leave Shimoni and head north along the paved road toward Mombasa. We enter the city from the direction of the Likoni district. Mombasa is a coastal city of around 500,000 people and a major ocean port. It expanded rapidly after the completion of the railway in 1902, linking the Indian Ocean to Uganda. Today, Mombasa blends modernity with tradition. Porters pushing large wooden carts, coconut vendors, and speeding Japanese cars all form part of the city's everyday scene. In the quieter side streets, vendors sell tourist souvenirs. By following local trading customs, you can bargain using a variety of psychological tactics. Kenyans value direct, personal interaction and are very straightforward. Bargaining is a ritual in itself, an integral part of local etiquette.
This is so big, as you can see. Two smacks. So see.
A dramatic gesture from the seller signals that the deal has been sealed. Mombasa is home to many monuments of the city's turbulent history. The most prominent is Fort Jesus, built by the Portuguese at the end of the 16th century. Fort Jesus rises on a steep coral escarpment. It is a place where a narrow channel and shallow waters force ships to pass close to the shore. This strategic site, as well as the entire architectural design, was chosen and planned by the Italian architect Giambattista Cairato. Despite its strong strategic position and cannon-lined bastions, the Portuguese garrison suffered repeated defeats. Over the course of 140 years, the largest European fortification in this part of the world was captured several times by the Arabs of Oman. Each time, the Portuguese managed to retake it, but in 1729 they abandoned the fort for good.
Could you pick some coconuts for us from the tree? Is that a problem? Not at all? Very good. Then go ahead and do it.
Our next stop along the Kenyan coast was the resort town of Diani Beach. Fresh coconuts for breakfast were just one of the many charms of this delightful place. Diani Beach was famous for its beautiful beaches and a coral reef stretching just 300 meters from the shore. Late October was the perfect time to explore the coast. Kenya's resorts were largely deserted. There was no trace of tourists from the major tour operators. We were persuaded by local beach boys to take a trip out to the coral reef. Rajmun's boat looked strikingly similar to the ones on the beach in Sanur, Bali. The distinctive outriggers on both sides of the hull gave it an unusual shape. They brought to mind small water striders found on freshwater bodies in northern Europe. Such boats along the Kenyan coast felt like a distant echo of the Indonesian seas carried all the way to East Africa by the same seafaring traditions that once helped settle Madagascar. Long stretches of Africa's Indian Ocean coastline are fringed by coral reefs. In many places, the receding tide briefly reveals the hidden world beneath the surface. Rajmund was explaining the names of marine organisms to Joanna. The tide had reached its lowest point, and vast stretches of the reef rose above the water's surface. The Indian Ocean's level, gradually declining over centuries, exposed ever larger deposits of dead coral reef. From these coral formations emerged the underground tunnels in Shimoni, the coastline around Mombasa, and dozens of newly formed islands and peninsulas along the African shore. Over the centuries, coral became the most widely used building material along the Swahili coast. Sea urchins like the one Rajmund caught, along with shells and corals, slowly transformed into a limestone crust, hard as stone. To us, the most beautiful inhabitants of the reef were the red starfish, their shells uncannily resembling plastic toys. The ocean began to reclaim the reef, and the coral gardens slowly vanished beneath the water. We returned to a beach bathed in tropical sunlight. We discovered the charms of Diani beach. It was time to move on. We said goodbye to Rajmund and his friends. We traveled north. A few kilometers from Mombasa lay the ruins of a 15th century Swahili town. The ruins of Shimba Hills lie right by the ocean. We know nothing about the fate of this Swahili settlement. Shimba Hills means the house of the slave. The settlement's original name has been lost to the depths of time, along with its inhabitants, who abandoned the town for reasons unknown more than 500 years ago. The town's largest structure was a mosque, set right by the ocean. Built of coral stone, it still retains one of its original portals. Nearby stands a tomb bearing a Quranic inscription carved into coral, oriented toward Mecca, declaring that every soul shall taste death and that life on earth is but an illusion. Beside the oceanfront ruins at Shimba Hills, there are also the remains of two smaller mosques and several impressive residential houses. Majestic baobabs growing among the house walls were clear evidence that the town had been abandoned long ago. Only after hundreds of years do these sponge-like trees reach a girth of several meters. It seems that the lack of a natural harbor where trading ships could dock was the main reason for the decline of this Swahili town. "100 kilometers farther north lies the most famous complex of Swahili ruins along the entire coast. Our arrival in Gedi caught the attention of the local monkeys. A few, clearly accustomed to humans, confidently posed for photos. In the 15th century, Gedi was home to more than 2,000 people. Gedi's largest structure was the palace, accessed through a grand gate with an imposing portico. The largest space in the palace was the so-called sunken courtyard, where the ruler could receive guests without inviting them into his private quarters. The custom of separating men and women gave rise to a network of distinct corridors and rooms within the palace. The location of such a large town 5 kilometers from the ocean is puzzling. The ruins of 7 mosques and a spearhead carved into one of the portals point to an African form of Islam practiced by Gedi's inhabitants. The coral stone from which Gedi was built has proved remarkably durable. Abandoned 3 centuries ago, the town still intrigues and fascinates scholars of African cultures. The Portuguese, who dominated the coast in the 16th century, were unaware of its existence. One of the causes behind the decline of the coral-built towns seems to have been the climate shift that took place over the 16th century. Reduced rainfall, along with pressure from the northwest by the warlike Gala tribes, may have dealt a fatal blow to the inhabitants of Gedi. The Shimba Hills lie just 20 kilometers from the Indian Ocean. Mornings here can be cool. Thick mist in the valleys gives way to the sun's rays. The hills, rising to about 500 meters, are richly vegetated. In the lower parts of the Shimba Hills stretches a rainforest, part of the original coastal jungle that once covered the shores of East Africa. We camp at a campsite within the national park. The Shimba Hills are a refuge for some of the last wild animals in this part of Kenya. Somewhere in the valley, herds of elephants and sable antelopes are hiding. The largest land mammals can now be seen only in a few parks across East Africa. In the Shimba Hills, herds still roam with their young calves. Giraffes are graceful subjects for photographers on safari. Adults can reach heights of up to 6 meters. Giraffes have several anatomical peculiarities. Despite their long necks, they have only 7 cervical vertebrae, just like humans. Their tongues can reach up to 40 centimeters, allowing them to strip entire acacia crowns of their thorny leaves. Its long neck, gently swaying head, and unhurried stride lend the giraffe a natural grace and elegance. When it runs, it seems almost to glide. Giraffes are generally regarded as gentle animals. When threatened, however, they can emit deep, guttural sounds and deliver kicks with tremendous force. Shimba Hills was the final stage of our journey along the Kenyan coast. The road ahead led north. We planned to change our mode of transport and head to the Central Plateau by train from Mombasa to Nairobi. Built at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, the railway line was a convenient means of transport. Unnoticed by our eyes, the train covered significant changes in elevation as it climbed toward the Central Highlands. The snow-capped peaks of Mount Kenya towered above the town of Naro Maru, which lies at an elevation of 1,800 meters. It was a popular base for those heading into the mountains.